let's begin the today's session. This session has been organized under the aegis of the Electronics and ICT Expert Committee of BCIC. We'd like to specially thank Dr. V. Veerappan, Chairman of the Electronics and ICT Expert Committee of BCIC and President of Tesol Semiconductors, for curating the session for the benefit of our members. Unfortunately, due to his personal exigency, he couldn't join for today's session. This session will be addressed by Mr. Gurraj B. Deshpande, Senior Vice President and Head, Bangalore Development Center Infosys Limited, and Chairman of Electronic City Industrial Township Authority, LCTA. On behalf of the BCIC, we express our sincere thanks to Mr. Gurraj for accepting our invitation to address on this important subject. We would also like to thank all the participants for joining in today's session. We request all of you to kindly mute your mic and webcam option. This is to enhance and keep the bandwidth strong, as well as avoid any disturbance in the background. Please post your questions on the chat box, and our speaker will respond to the questions as and when on need based. Or you could raise your hand; he'll be able to answer the question. May I now invite our president, Mr. T.R. Parshuraman, who is also our president and whole-time director of Toyota Industries Engine Private Limited, to do the welcome address. Thanking you all once again. Over to you, President, sir.
Thank you, Prithvi. Very good morning, all ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I extend a very, very hearty welcome to Shri Gururaj Deshpande ji for sparing his valuable time to share his experience on a very, very important topic. Thank you very much, sir, for your precious time, and we are very honored to listen to you today. And
Thank
I
you,
also
sir.
congratulate. Thank you very much.
My pleasure as well. Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot. I also understand you're also the president of Electronic City Association, which is also very important to Bangalore Chambers, because we would like to connect with some of the key associations like Electronic City and Bidadi Industrial Association, where we are very closely involved with Toyota Group. So I look forward to have a very good synergy. I also congratulate Dr. Veerappan, my good friend. Unfortunately, he's not here today because of his personal emergency, for organizing this session. So this session is a very important session because IT is one of the big industries that is booming in spite of all challenges. In fact, the evergreen industry, I would say, in the COVID times that survived. Gentlemen, can you please switch off your mics, please, in the interest of the audience? Yeah, I think IT was one of the survivors, and I would say it was an evergreen survivor. And we learned several things in this pandemic. In fact, in manufacturing industries, we never thought that we would be able to work from home, and we would like to have seamless meetings. And as my own company, Toyota, we used to spend billions of dollars in having the meetings in every destination, be it Bangkok or Philippines, Australia, US or Japan. But today, last 2 years, it's the ninth wonder of the world, I would say. We have not traveled, which means it is possible. I think really this was a great wake-up call for all of us. And seamless meetings, immaterial of time, immaterial of place or your location. So, in fact, I'm now talking from my car. I'm on the way to another meeting. So, which means life has become very seamless. Thanks to the COVID, we learned several things. I think innumerable number of learnings for institutions across the board, and for HR also has been a tremendous learning. And IT is very important to us because India's export is largely constituted by IT, and approximately 8 to 9% of the GDP is coming from this industry, and a huge US exports happening from India through the service industry. And India constitute, I'm told, close to 50% of the kind of services group. Therefore, it's a great opportunity. But having said that, life is not so easy. In fact, hiring thousands and thousands of people and training them, then they have a very short lifespans because they always change jobs in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. So I can understand the challenges because as manufacturing organizations, I know how difficult it is to train people. But in Toyota, we believe in lifetime employment. But that's a myth. But nevertheless, I think how to retain people has been a great challenge. I think this kind of challenges are there. And again, how to beat the competition, how to survive the competition. Because today we have all big companies, Infosys, HCL, TCS, Wipro. They're all really great masters of setting new paradigms in the Indian IT industry. And they are evergreen, I would say. In fact, the investors have been so happy. In fact, companies like Infosys, I think it has been a kind of a gold mine for investors and for the nation. Therefore, today I'm very delighted that Mr. Gururaj Deshpande is here with us. He's a very senior person, and we're going to listen to him some of the challenges and the way forward for the Indian IT companies, and of course the kind of challenges that have come out in the recent times because of the pandemic and the lessons learned. So I don't want to take much of your time. So I would wish you a great session today, and I would like to associate with Mr. Gururaj Deshpande ji in the futuristic also, because Infosys also is our member, and a lot of senior people have been supporting us. So with this introduction, I hand over the podium to Mr. Gururaj Deshpande. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Parashuraman sir. Thank you so much. Pleasure meeting you and to interact with BCIC. Well, it's my first interaction with BCIC, so nice to get introduced, and thank you so much for the opportunity as well. And yeah, I think today's topic is something I chose to be as software industry trends. Of course, I do recognize that many of our audience may not be so deeply exposed to IT as such, but I thought I must still cover this sort of a broad topic, and hopefully people will walk away with a bit of an understanding of what's happening in this space. And you may still see a bit of a technical coverage as to what's happening in this space, because otherwise I didn't think the coverage would be adequate enough. But I'll still try not to keep it overly technical so as to miss my audience as well. So the way I want to structure this is I will cover a bit of a predefined thought process, cover the top trends in the industry, and some of it will ring a bell to you. You would have heard some of this jargon, some of this terminology here and there. So maybe it helps put things into perspective. And then we will also keep aside some time for question and answers as well. So yeah, having said that, let me get started. I'll just bring up a very simple slide deck. I don't believe in a lot of busy slides, so just something to keep the flow. So let me just bring it up quickly. Yeah, just a quick check to see if you can actually see my slides here.
Yeah, it should come to the slide mode. It is right now. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so like we mentioned in the introduction, this whole IT industry is a huge industry for India, contributing significantly to our GDP. Significant numbers of people employed, roughly at about 200 billion USD annually, and still growing significantly, right? And the state of the industry right now is actually quite hot. If you just go back a year, when we were in the early stages of the whole pandemic, there was a bit of a question mark on what does it mean to our industry, what does it mean to the services sector, to the BPM sector. But the good news is that as a country, we have actually weathered the storm extremely well. In fact, in a matter of days or weeks, the whole industry moved from being on campus, on site, into a completely virtual mode. Of course, we always had a bit of a virtual operation, but it was not significant. People would work from home once in a while, occasionally, but a bulk of our industry was based on people coming together on campuses. For example, if you take Infosys, we have huge campuses all over India and even outside India. For example, our campus in Bangalore is about well over 70, 80 acres, 50,000 people work out of our campuses. And so it was a kind of a defining moment. But looking back, the industry has managed it well, tackled the risks well, and also kind of given a confidence to the rest of the world that, hey, we are in safe hands. And so the deal pipelines are very strong. If you take companies like us, they've actually given growth guidance of well over 12, 13, 14% and improving guidance as we go along. So that's a sign of a very, very strong demand pipeline for the whole industry. So I think that's roughly where we are, and software is all around us. And if you remember the quote by Mark Anderson, I think he once upon a time, long time ago, said software is eating the world, and still holds true. I think software is all around us. It is not easy to miss software around you, right? It is around you in terms of apps, our phones, the technologies we deal with. The touch points are only increasing as we go along, day after day. So that's where we are. I wanted to cover the broad trends shaping our industry, some technical, some otherwise, but hopefully you will get a good view of where we are. And I intend to cover more breadth than depth. I'm not going into company specific details, not going into a lot of technology or anything, but just will skim the surface. That's the best time we have right now. And when we speak of software, I think we are broadly talking of the services industry, which is very big in India and over the globe. We're talking of also products and platforms. I'm using this whole software terminology quite interchangeably, right? And the industry, of course, cuts across services, products, platforms, multiple areas. So I'll just jump right in, and clearly the buzzword today is digital, right? The whole digital paradigm has been around us. Many years ago, we used to talk of digital as a trend, but I would probably say right now we are living through digital. We are at the midpoint of that, and everything pretty much is digital in the sense of the true sense of the word. So almost every bit of work every company has been doing can be classified digital. Companies like us actually report the number of the percentage of digital revenues stands at about 50% of the total work we do, but it is getting increasingly more and more, right? So everything is digital in that sense. So what are the trends, right? Which are the trends which are shaping the digital demand? What is the kind of work that's happening through the industry, right? Ultimately, the industry like us caters to the biggest companies across the globe, right? We work with the top Fortune 500s. We work with the best of the best companies across the world. So what really happens underneath the hood, right? What kind of work do people do? To start with, again, these are multiple trends. I'm not talking about it in any particular priority or order, but I have just put a bunch of things together. So the first one is cloud adoption, right? Again, this is a term very hard to miss. Each of you would have encountered the terminology of cloud. Cloud in the simplest sense refers to infrastructure that sits somewhere remotely, that we all, when I say we as individuals, we as enterprises, we just consume on a need basis, right? There was a time, for those of you who have been in the industry for long, you're well aware of the huge amount of IT infrastructure that used to sit in companies, right? In our data centers, servers, multiple kinds of servers, hardware, other kinds of hardware, storage. It used to be like a massive set of infrastructure that companies had to invest in, and it used to keep growing, right? As the usage increased, as the use cases increased, as data increased, you kept increasing your investment into managing your own data centers. But cloud has actually disrupted this whole paradigm, right? And today enterprises are taking more and more of these investments and consuming it only on a need basis, right? And I put some of the buzzwords here. When we say elasticity, we really mean, for example, right, last year when COVID hit everybody, every industry, companies had to downscale. When the demand came down, we didn't need as much of a compute infrastructure. We didn't need as much storage, probably. We didn't have to keep upgrading every now and then. So there was a need to actually downscale the whole computing environment. And similarly, when busy seasons come in, it could be the Christmas season for the retail industry, or it could be any other seasonality in the demand, there is a need to upscale as well. So that amount of going up, going down, that elasticity we speak about is easily possible through cloud, right? So today more and more enterprises are pushing their what we call as workloads into the cloud. Again, cloud has different connotations. There are public clouds, there are private clouds that enterprise set up. There are hybrid clouds, which is essentially a mix of private plus public kind of a thing. So cloud adoption has only started to increase. Then there is a whole aspect of security on the cloud. How do you set up a secure workload so no enterprise wants to be compromised on security? Then I have mentioned here a term called native services, which means typically what would be created in an enterprise in terms of a service today is all mostly available on the cloud. So the cloud services keep on increasing. So there is a lot of artificial intelligence services available on the cloud. You could do machine learning on the cloud. So it is not just data and storage that sits on the cloud, but then you are also getting smarter services on the cloud, right? And then the smarter services are only increasing day by day. For example, if there is an industry like retail, or if there is an industry like insurance, or an industry like healthcare, how can you outright go to this cloud and use a service which is workable for that particular industry? Right? Today, all of the big enterprises, be it Amazon or Google or Microsoft, they are all building these specific industry kind of services on the cloud as well. So it's a very hot and happening space. And the term I have put here called as polycloud essentially refers to take any company or a bank or any large retailer. They don't want to be locked into a particular cloud environment. Nobody wants to be totally in the hands of an Amazon or totally in the hands of a Microsoft or Google. These are the three top cloud providers, right? So nobody wants to be confined to that. So polycloud is a big thing going on in the industry, where people say that I don't want to be locked in. I want to be able to lift and shift my workload from one cloud to the other, or I want to have the benefit of multiple clouds operating for my benefit. So that is what is called as polycloud. So these are some buzzwords you will encounter in the industry. But why would one go to cloud? It is basically to get the benefit of a reduced cost of ownership, to get the benefit of time to value, to get the benefit of elasticity, to do better with your workloads, right? So those are some of the reasons driving cloud adoption. What does it mean for the industry? People like us, we do cloud strategy work, we do cloud migrations, we set up workloads for the cloud, we set up hybrid public private clouds. So multiple, right? So the whole amount of things you could do under the whole umbrella of cloud adoption. So I'll keep going. I'm not, given I'm in full screen mode, I'm not able to see any questions, but it will help if somebody just calls out any question if there is any, or I'll probably take a logical break and come back to see questions as well. I'll keep moving then.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. And then, okay, so moving on, right? So the other big buzzwords you hear are, these are again terms you will not miss. So this is there is the whole big data.
Mr. Hari Prasad has lifted the hand.
Okay,
like
please. Then Hari Prasad, do you want to raise a question right now?
Rupa can unmute him.
Sir, ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇತ್ತೆ ಭೂಪಾಲ ಕುಮಾರ್ ಗಣೇಶನ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ನಿಖಿಲ್ ಅಶ್ವತೀಶನ್.
Hari Prasad, you can go ahead.
ಭೂಪಾಲ ಕುಮಾರ್.
Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I just want to know the retentivity and the reliability of data which is stored in the cloud. What is the time duration? Is it 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? Because you are mentioning about data pertaining to insurance and other things,
Yep.
which has got a long gestation period. Will this data remain intact with absolute integrity?
Absolutely, sir. I think the cloud companies, I think, have to take care of some of this at the bare minimum, because a lot of this data is bound by regulation. There are, industry paradigms around how long you should keep data, how long should customer data be stored, how should data be encrypted. All of those paradigms are very much there. So cloud providers treat this as really hygiene. This is the bare minimum they have to do to grow their business in the cloud. In fact, these were the kind of constraints that existed many years ago, right? What will happen to my data? Encryption, how long can I keep it? What if there is a data loss? What about business continuity? I think today the whole cloud adoption has become so mature that some of the data that you once thought cannot sit on a cloud or cannot move out of your enterprise today is sitting completely on the cloud. So these are concerns which have been taken care of very, very well, and they continue to improve on these aspects as well. So absolutely, sir, this is today considered hygiene in the industry.
You mean to say it will be permanent in nature, the data?
Yes, it's up to you, right? If you want to keep the data permanently and pay for it, as an enterprise, you make those decisions. But if you say, okay, my data, I don't need this, I don't need data, say after 7 years or whatever, it's up to you to kind of bring it down and probably purge that data, whatever. So it's a decision you make as an enterprise. It is not a decision that the cloud provider is actually making. The cloud provider allows you to keep it perpetually.
Thank you very much.
There's a question in the chat. Can you comment on underwater cloud?
Yeah. See, when we speak of cloud, right? Typically, how does an Amazon or a Microsoft or a Google actually deliver the cloud infrastructure? It actually is, they run shared data centers globally. So they may have multiple shared data centers in the US, or they may have in Singapore. So they call it as a cloud region, because there are restrictions on certain countries as to where data can be stored. Some countries insist that their data doesn't leave the shores. So each of these companies have to set up data centers within that particular the country or a region. So that is the necessity for building multiple cloud environments, multiple regions across the globe. It is not enough for them to say it is in the US and all data must sit in the US. So the regions are only growing. India is a region, Singapore is a region, Europe, US, there are multiple regions across the world. And this whole underwater thing has actually been an experiment, because at the end of the day, these data centers are still not the greenest you could find, right? So they still consume power, emissions, whatever. So there has been experiment to do underwater data centers, etc. I think Microsoft tried it out, and many other companies have been still trying it out. But I would right now say it is still not a thing, right? It is probably an experiment to see if we could make it a bit more greener. Can power consumptions be reduced? Do we need to reduce cooling? Maybe because it's underwater, stuff like that. But I think it's right now an experiment, I would say. At least that's the best I know.
Yeah, Guraj, you can continue.
Okay. Yeah. Just bring back the screen 1 second. Okay. Okay, so let's jump to the whole paradigm of big data, right? And we've always heard this term big data. So essentially today there is a whole lot of data getting generated around us. Every time you pick up the phone, you click something, you look at something, you like something on Facebook or Instagram, or you pick up the phone and call an enterprise. Each of that is data, right? I think pretty much there is like zillions of data getting generated, many zettabytes of data, whatever that number is. There's a humongous amount of data getting generated through enterprises. And the more smarter the devices get, the more the data gets collected, right? And today it's very hard to not be a contributor to data in some way or the other. So essentially, the whole industry is looking at how do I use all of this data, right? Retailers are trying to say, okay, I have all this data coming through my point of sale, through my terminals. How can I use all of that data to determine, can I make a better offer to this customer? Can I actually predict what the customer wants well in advance? Can I demand forecast for the festival season using all of his purchasing patterns available, right? So every company is looking at using the data, monetizing the data, then trying to determine, okay, what is the intelligence that I can get out of this data, right? And then of course trying to predict, for the better future of my business. That is, very simply put. And in some cases, it's also to kind of automate the action, having learned from the data, can I just automate the action using all of this data? And that whole automating of the action can be in many forms. A retailer's automated action can be, can I send a notification or an email to the consumer saying, hey, here is a great offer for this particular product, well before the customer even thinks he or she needs it. Or the action could as well be, if you take an example of a machine, you look at the performance data of the machine and actually predict a failure. Or maybe you could even go and fix the failure automatically, right? So there are many flavors of the whole data paradigm. And the use cases that we see around us are humongous. Multiple From a consumer perspective, even on your phone today, when you look at face detection, photos getting organized through individual faces, Siri, voice detection, etc., etc. These are all examples of big data, AI, and ML at play, right? And every industry, I would say, is probably getting disrupted using data, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. For example, look at the how the life of lawyers is changing, right? We are actually working on many use cases where we're actually cutting down the size of legal teams within enterprises. So we have a product which actually reads through contracts and it actually redlines contracts. It will know based on the training you have done which are the clauses which are contentious or which are redlining. Then you could aggregate all of that and risk score contracts, or you could even create contracts without a lawyer, right? Based on your company standards and stuff like that. You could do that. Or if you're taking an example of a bank, you can actually do risk scoring for loans. You can do loan approvals using past data. What are the criteria on which you would typically approve loans? You basically bring all of that data, train the model, look at the customer profile, and you could actually do decisioning automatically on loans, right? You could also do loan collections automatically. For example, if you have a loan book of 100 people, you may actually prioritize and say, hey, maybe these are the 10 loans which need to be focused on for collections and which are likely to go delinquent. And these are the 90 that you don't need to worry about. And this is all possible with the data, right? You have the customer data, you have the payment data, you have the risk profile. You can bring all of that together using machine learning and AI and start doing some of these things. Or you could do computer vision based detection. For example, in the insurance sector, you could look at customer claims, you could digitize claims, you could look at pictures and try to determine if the car is in good shape or not, or things like that. So anything is possible using vision. So the use cases are digitizing documents. Then you could look at healthcare, where people are doing remote diagnosis. People are looking at interpreting scans, interpreting radiology reports using past data, right? Basically, you have millions of data that the computer learns from and is able to say, hey, here is an X-ray that doesn't look like is okay. It's very easy to do that. So the industry has often spoken about disrupting the life of radiologists, life of lawyers, and stuff like that. While it seems a bit like fiction, the reality is there has always been a human plus machine kind of a paradigm, right? So essentially, the machines are helping humans do their job better. So I think that's where the whole industry is going. There is also an aspect of personalized medicine, for example. Today, the whole industry in medical industry believes in one size fits all, right? So if there is an illness here is the drug. Right? If somebody is going through depression, here is drug number 1. If that doesn't work, you look at drug number 2. And so that's pretty much how treatment happens today. But then you could look at a whole lot of data and then try to look at what does it mean to each individual, their genetic composition, and is this drug going to work on them? So personalized medicine is another good example. Then the whole supply chain example that I spoke about earlier, right? How do you bring all of that data together to say, okay, here is a marketing campaign that's about to run. Will it have a necessary effect if I just blindly go and do this campaign? Or what does my past history tell me about my campaigns? Things like that. So every industry, I think, is getting disrupted using their own data, bringing the power of ML and AI. Just 2 things. I know we don't have too much time, but just 2 things I want to talk about is the whole aspect of ethical AI coming into picture. When I say ethical AI, what it means is, say, for example, today you are using artificial intelligence today to say, decide on your loan approvals, for example. And it so happens that you have used data which is probably aligned to one skin color or something like that, possibly, right? In a country like US. Now, will the AI intelligence start erring on the side of, say, refusing loans for people who are of color, things like that, right? So these are the aspects of ethical AI, because machines learn from the data, and if the data is skewed, obviously the decisions of machines can be skewed. So that raises the whole question of ethics on AI and stuff like that, right? So then explainable AI is another paradigm where ultimately the decision that an AI system has taken has to be explainable, right? It is not enough for a computer to say yes or no to a decision, but also to be able to go back and explain it, saying, hey, here is the exact reason why such a decision was obtained. So people are talking about these things in the context of an enterprise, and it's very, very important that explainability and the whole ethical aspect of AI also be taken care of. So let me move on. I'm just watching the time as well. Give me a second. Okay, I'll move on. I think there's a lot to talk about. Please stop me if there is something. And another trend doing the rounds is robotic process automation. Again, typically when we think of robots, we actually think of machines. Of course, robots as machines in the manufacturing industry have been around for a very long time. But in a process industry, when I say process industry, you mean a BPO back office, or people picking up calls, people running various processes in a workflow. In this space, automation has not been there. Essentially, there has been a lot of people sitting on a floor trying to do various things manually. But there are today tools available, softwares available to do robotic process automation, wherein essentially the whole automation software will actually simulate the whole workflow. To log into a system, it will look up the data, it will then check some other database, then it will go pull up another system, it will send an email, it will reconcile the Excel sheet. So today there are softwares available which can do a robotic process automation, and essentially the advantage here is accuracy, reducing the cost of people. So using an RPA tool, you could actually implement automation of RPA processes completely. And when you bring an AI into that, it makes it all the more stronger. So essentially a robot can actually maybe look up a picture, look up a document, extract the values from the document, exactly like what a human would do, and it will also do the decision making. Right? Of course, you need data, you need good data to train, you need to do all that. But when you have it in place, an RPA tool can actually bring in that entire benefit going for the enterprise. So that's one particular trend. Then the whole aspect of user experience, it's a very, very huge thing in the industry. Sometimes we don't realize how big a thing it is, because ultimately every company is trying to keep their user base intact, not trying to lose the users. And user demands also on experience has gone up significantly, right? So today it is not enough for a company to have a shoddy website or a shoddy web app. People expect the highest level of user experience, right? They expect it to be personalized. They expect it to know who I am. They expect it to know what have I done with this company before? What has been my history? What have I bought? What have I interacted? What have been my interaction points? Have I called this company before? When did I call? Right? So expect the industry to be aware of these things. Right? That's what I mean by personalized experiences. So today this has become a benchmark. Right? If any of you or I call a company, or say I reach out to Amazon, I expect them to know that I have had a chat with them, or I have called them on such and such a date, and I want to build on that, as against starting on ground zero. So that's the whole aspect of personalization, context sensitiveness, right? Being aware of where is our interaction today. So today that's taken for a given, and that's where IT companies have a lot of work going to bring the best of the experiences, best of digital experiences. Again, this ultimately all of this will use data. It will use some amount of machine learning or AI to bring it all together. It also uses a lot of front-end technologies, right? The technologies that you actually see on a web page or on a web app. So those are the digital skills that we are talking about, hugely in demand. The industry is right now going through a phase, I think, probably of very high attrition. I think it's a great time to be in IT. Lots of jobs available, and digital skills are extremely in demand. When I say digital skills, I mean both front-end skills. It could be JavaScript type of skills, or a Python, or in the industry we use a term called full stack. What it actually means is, earlier we would have specialization for front-end technologies, we would have specialization for server technologies, somebody else would do the testing, somebody would do the deployment. But when we say full stack, it essentially means that the whole range of skills are available in a person. So that's where the industry is moving. So it is all about multiple specializations, not as much about individual one or the other kind of specializations. The other paradigm happening in the industry is non-engineering skills. There has been a lot of talk about the value of of liberal arts, the value of humanities, because the whole space is getting, pretty much everything is looking like technology and looking like digital, right? So you need people to have great amount of imagination, great amount of design skills to be able to come up with a good intuitive user interface, be able to almost expect people to have that kind of an intuition going. So I think that's where the industry is going. So as much as software sounds like a lot of engineering skills, there is also a lot of non-engineering skills in terms of being able to consume people from arts backgrounds, design backgrounds, and things like that. So that's another trend going on in the industry right now. Mobility I spoke about. Mobility, essentially everything is now on a handheld. More and more of our activities are done on the phones, as against doing it on a laptop or actually logging in somewhere to actually do things. It is on the move. People expect technologies to deliver to them, right? Here is who I am, and Parashuraman sir spoke about how the industry got disrupted. Everybody is doing things virtually and on the move. Right, and today that's a fair expectation for individuals and for enterprises. If there are employees working in any company, I think they do expect to have the tools so that I can join a meeting when I'm on the road. I can log my attendance while on the road. I can apply for leave, right? I can look up my previous meeting notes. All of that has to be available to me on the move. So that's become a kind of a fair expectation for enterprises and for end consumers. So mobility is a big part of the work that the IT industry does. The other dimension which is sort of disrupting this whole thing is the availability of free and open source software. Again, the industry has moved from big, large technical technology companies like the Oracles, the Microsofts of the world, where companies had to pay huge amounts to buy a Microsoft license or an Oracle database license or any other software. But the whole paradigm has started to move towards what we call as FOSS, free and open source software. Open source essentially means essentially people across the globe are contributing to the project to make that particular software even better. So today, I think you have a lot of such FOSS softwares available, and people keep building on FOSS projects. And today, the best of the best softwares have been built from open source, and this is a big change in the industry. If you're in the industry 20 years ago to now, you will see that the best softwares like say a TensorFlow or a Kubernetes or Cassandra, Docker, what have you. Right? All of these were actually built on open source and are continually enhanced on a day-to-day basis. So this is again a big paradigm. Today's industry is all about taking open source, using it, making it better, giving it back to the community. So there's a big community angle around open source, right? So companies are not just thinking for themselves, but essentially they're thinking on behalf of the community, right? How can I create something and how can I give back, and somebody else will take it and make it even better. So that's the whole community aspect of software building. So some of the best softwares today that are used are all open source, and companies can still make money using open source. Shall I keep going? Any questions so far?
Yeah, we can take one or two questions if anything, if any participants are interested to ask for. Raise your hand or you can post a question in the chat box.
Okay, maybe there are none. I'll keep going. We cover a little more and then come back for more questions. I'll rush the pace a bit. I still want to stop on time if possible. So yeah. So the other one you have probably been hearing about in this industry through the last year is a mention of low code, no code, right? And it sounds like a very complicated thing, but in very simple terms, what it actually means is the whole aspect of software development is complex, right? It needs programming skills, it needs logical skills, it needs awareness of syntax, knowing a language as such, right? For someone to be able to come and contribute. But the way the whole industry is going is towards visual software development. Basically, you will have tools to kind of drag and drop. You will have smart services. You can kind of visually develop software as against actually writing it, line by line. So you will have pre-built connectors. You will have, there is no need to write every line of code per se, but you can just stitch things together. So this is, broadly how the industry has been changing in the last few years. But this year, I think this has started to really come of age, and you will hear a lot about this in the software world. Right? There are many platforms like Appian or OutSystems, and there are many companies you not even have heard about, but they are becoming very, very popular in the whole low code, no code kind of a space. That's the other big trend going on. Similarly, there has been a big advent of modern programming languages, and as I say, necessity is the mother of invention. And in the last few years, while programming languages like Java have existed for a very long time, newer languages have come in like Swift for Apple, or Rust, or Go, or a Kotlin, or Julia. You would not have even heard about these things, but within the whole programming world, these have started to become popular. And again, like I said, necessity is what has driven some of these languages. When I say necessity, I mean there has been an evolution of hardware, there have been processors, there are many multi-core processors available today. A lot of development is happening on the cloud. Then you have processors like GPU, that you need to take advantage of. You have to, think about concurrency, parallelism, programmer productivity, right? So I think there are a lot of these paradigms which are shaping the evolution of modern programming languages. So you may probably going forward, when you see names like Swift, Rust, or Go, you may relate to that, saying, okay, here is probably a newer programming language which probably gets the best out of programmers as against traditional language. So not to say that these will completely replace earlier languages, but there is a good mix and match possible, based on what you're actually trying to program for and things like that. Then there is a whole aspect of AR, VR. I think all of you have heard about augmented reality and virtual reality, and possibly even begun to experience some of this. Right? For example, I'll give you a very rudimentary example. As far as the Infosys campus is concerned, we would have probably 600-700 delegations visit our campus earlier, right? Because we took pride in our campus. We have a pretty lavish kind of a campus going in. But of late in the last year, we have absolutely had no travel, no people coming in. But we are able to simulate some of these experiences. So we have a digital campus. People can actually go in, and it's almost like walking into the campus, being able to go to a building, zoom into the building, and see maybe what's available in terms of center of excellence, different technologies, experiencing different technologies. That's a very simple definition of augmented reality or virtual reality. There are many usages across multiple sectors. We could look at it for employee training, right? How do you train employees in a remote world? So in the post-pandemic world, AR VR is taking even more significance. It could be for retail industries, it could be for healthcare. How does a physician actually kind of experience going into a human body and analyzing what is happening to your body, right? All that is happening through AR, VR. It could be for entertainment industry, it could be for construction, it could be for even mechanical type of industries, right? If somebody is actually going into a mine to see what is wrong, or how is the situation within a mine, it could be done probably somebody sitting virtually somewhere and still being able to experience going underwater, into a oil rig, or experience going into a mine or stuff like that. So limitless possibilities again from an AR VR kind of a perspective. So people are using it for service, people are using it for simulation, for training, what have you, right? So I think the possibilities are endless there. Again, a few more before I wrap up and take some questions. You all heard about Internet of Things, essentially smart sensors, smart devices, communicating, getting a lot of data out, and for people to manage those devices remotely, right? And there's also been the concept of a digital twin. For example, if you're running a very large chiller plant somewhere on your campus, you can actually create a digital equivalent of that plant and kind of monitor that whole entity digitally, right? You can look at the sensors, you can look at the meter readings, you can look at failure logs, and you could also learn from that. Again, I spoke of prediction earlier, I spoke of healing earlier, right? Healing is a term that's often used in the industry. You could collect all of this data and try to make sense of it digitally, as against actually being there and taking a meter reading or looking at the temperature of the sensor of the machine or whatever. So that's another big driver for the whole IT industry is IoT and digital thing. Then the next one is SaaS platforms, software as a service. You've probably all heard about software as a service. This is a big shift from before to now. Today, SaaS is a big thing in the industry, and there are many companies doing SaaS. Essentially, software as a service is a change from earlier. I would say, okay, here's a set of 100 licenses for this particular software. You take it and you install it in your company, as against a platform like Salesforce or an Office 365 or a Zendesk or a DocuSign. There are many SaaS platforms available today based on what you want to do, or it could be CRM, for example. Today, you don't need to buy a CRM license, or you don't need to buy a very large SAP set of licenses or Oracle licenses, but essentially you can use any of this on the cloud. and you only pay for what you use, right? So it's given to you. You all you need is a good internet connection. You pay for it. You subscribe to it, right? Essentially, you say this is the amount I pay monthly, and you consume the service. Or you probably don't even pay monthly. You just pay for what you use, maybe by transaction or what have you. So the whole commercial model of the industry has moved into anything as a service, which is what I mean by XaaS. So it could be software as a service, it could be infrastructure as a service. I spoke of cloud earlier. So you're not paying for buying a server, you're not paying for buying a machine, but you're just paying for a virtual machine, right? That's the whole difference of as a service. So you're maybe paying for storage, right? For example, I don't know how many of you use the iCloud storage of Apple. You essentially pay for the the number of gigabytes or terabytes that you use, but essentially you're not buying a hard disk for yourself or something, right? That's a very simple definition of say infrastructure as a service or storage as a service. So the whole industry is moving towards as a service, and of course in our own worlds we all use many things as a service, right? We are using Porter, we are using Zomatos of the world, we are using Uber. So everything is literally a service in that sense, right? So everything is getting disrupted towards being a service as against ownership of something, right? It could be Airbnb as a classic example as well. You're just consuming a rental when you need it, right? You're not buying a timeshare or anything of that sort. So the whole industry is moving in a similar paradigm for software as well. The whole API economy, probably again heard the word API. Essentially it's an interface, application programming interface available. Today, the whole world is changing in terms of APIs, right? And what I mean is today industries are interacting, consuming each other's services. For example, a traffic signal today may consume the data of Google or Google Maps, right? Because there is data on traffic congestion available. So I could make my signal smarter by consuming data from Google to say, okay, it is the traffic volume, density, whatever. Right? So that is one simple example. The whole UPI payment is an API. Today, UPI is possible because banks are exposing their own APIs to the payment systems, to the payment gateway, and hence the communication of bank to bank is possible. Similarly, financial data, stock data is available, or even the Aadhaar authentication itself is an example of API. Right? Today, I'm able to go into a shop or I'm able to buy a product which authenticates me as an individual using Aadhaar. So that's all possible through API gateways. So today, if you are any business entity, you will provide for APIs. If you're a bank, you will assume that, okay, my service has to be consumed by either some other bank or some other third party which is trying to build an application, right, on my kind of services. So the whole API creation, APification as we call it in the industry, is a totally happening kind of a paradigm as well, right? So that's about API economy. I will take only a few minutes. I know we are at about 8 minutes short. So the whole aspect of cyber security and data privacy, very, very big deal right now, because especially in the last year, as more and more businesses have gone virtual, there has been also heavy incidents of breach of cyber security, breach of data. We know about what happened with Marriott or Twitter, Nintendo, Facebook. So every day there are so many attacks happening, state actors, other actors, malicious actors coming in trying to steal your data. So what it means for enterprises is to be very secure and comfortable that, okay, my perimeter is guarded, my data is encrypted, I don't risk data loss, I don't stand exposed in the court of law as well. So the whole aspect of cybersecurity is a big thing for IT industry. So this is a growing practice. Many millions of dollars are being spent on cybersecurity strategy, the right set of tools, the guarding your data, the right hardware plus software, and especially if you're going into cloud, how do you take care of security on the cloud and things like that. So that's a huge industry in itself and a growing business for IT companies. Gig economy. This is really all about how do you consume skills across the world, right? Today you have platforms like Upwork, or you have platforms like, say, a TaskRabbit or a freelancer.com, where the world is the stage, right? If I'm sitting in Bangalore and I need to consume the best of the programming talent across the globe, all I need to do is go to a freelancer or go to Upwork or any of these platforms and get the best of the developers to actually contribute to my project, right, or to my development. So of course you have to take care of data security, privacy, and all of that. But today the whole the crowdsourcing of talent, as we call it, is opening up for people to come in, do a gig, and earn some money and go away, right? So that's the whole gig economy. There is also a concept of skills versus degrees. Slowly, while the industry was built on many years of degrees, somebody has to be an engineer, somebody has to have these particular degrees to be joining the industry. Today I can see that the whole paradigm is changing towards skills, right? Doesn't matter what degree you have. Maybe you didn't even go beyond the university or whatever, but as long as you're a great front-end programmer, or you're great in cybersecurity, or you must be the best ethical hacker that there is, you are actually hired. I mean, slowly that is the paradigm shift happening. I'm not saying it has fully happened. The thinking has started to go towards skills instead of degrees, right? And in fact, in our own company earlier, we used to have a concept of certain cutoff percentages and marks for hiring, but we are now starting to go beyond that and saying, okay, somebody is good, we can hire the person. Doesn't matter even if he didn't have the minimum cutoff percentage. So I think slowly that mindset has started to change for the industry. And as far as learning is concerned, I have put a terminology here called MOOC. You may have heard about it. Massive online open courses. Learning has gone almost completely virtual. We all know schools and colleges are anyway running virtual, but the whole, even in the IT industry, the whole learning has actually gone virtual for a while. Today, people are very comfortable going to a Coursera or going to some other university online. A lot of content available. You can learn at your own pace. You can interact with people. Of course, at the end of it, you can also get a certification for a small fee. Get a certificate for a small fee. So, sky is the limit. So the learning paradigm has moved to completely MOOC, and some of the best courses are today available online. And some of the most popular courses are the ones which are online. So it doesn't need somebody to walk in somewhere and start to learn. Hybrid work we spoke about. Industry has gone hybrid. Companies like us are operating almost 97-98% online, virtual. We don't even know where the people are. Of course, we do where they are. We do know where they are, but doesn't matter where they are. Customers don't care where they are as long as work gets done. And if anything, the pandemic has actually completely changed the way the industry works, right? And I see hybrid in a future world. Hybrid will only mean people come to work on certain days of the week for certain instances where they need to collaborate, but it is not an expectation that they come in each and every day. Then there is 5G. I don't have too much time for talking about this, but some amazing developments will come forth with the advent of 5G networks. Essentially, as the bandwidth gets raised, as more and more devices come into play, the industry will start seeing some phenomenal use cases, be it smart cities, be it healthcare, autonomous vehicles, drones, or agriculture, anything. I think again, every sector is probably ripe for 5G consumption because you will have a lot more devices communicating with each other at bandwidths that were once considered impossible. So the possibilities are again limitless for 5G. Then there is a whole aspect of blockchain, distributed ledger, cryptocurrencies, hot and happening space. It was spoken about for a long time, but I think it has come of age now. Essentially, blockchain or a distributed ledger is all about multiple parties looking at transactions, validating transactions, bringing in a lot more transparency, security, traceability, all of that. So blockchain again will have multiple manifestations. It is not just cryptocurrencies, but you could look at tracking of cross-border payments. You could look at music royalties. You could look at banks corresponding over LCs, everybody having the traceability of LCs, medical data, supply chain, even traceability right through the supply chain of authenticity of your goods. So I think there is again, every industry can look at blockchain and say, hey, here is how we can use the concept of a blockchain. But I think starting to be taken up well. I think even in India, there is a consortium of banks, I think, now working on using blockchain for LCs and stuff like that. So I think it will only improve as we go along. Edge computing, this is I think probably my last one. You will see this often. Again, in a cloud environment, all of the computing move to the cloud, but edge computing is actually the reverse of it, wherein every endpoint, right? Every phone that I have is today capable of doing a lot more transactions, a lot more computing. So looking at every endpoint device as a place to compute, as against moving everything to the server to compute. So that's the broad industry paradigm. Then there is also something called a quantum computing, where traditional computing is not able to solve some problems. So how can you bring the speed of quantum to solve some very difficult problems and things like that? So I know I'm out of time. I'll stop there, take some questions if there's any time available. And sorry, I was rushing through a lot of stuff, but I wanted to give a broad industry view of what all is happening, that makes this place so exciting.
No issues, Guruji. It was a wonderful presentation. Crips, the 1 hour slot that was being given to you. How much time you have, sir, to take up few
I'm
questions?
okay. If people have questions, I'm okay to stretch another 10 minutes or so.
Sure.
It's
There's
a
some
wonderful session, wonderful session, sir. In fact, it was very informative and great learnings. I think I'm sure this would be a good, I would say, 360-degree view for all aspiring people, and we should definitely have more sessions from you. Thank you so much for giving us a very good insight of very, very macro picture of several things. Really
Thank you,
appreciate
sir. Sometimes
it.
it's not easy to understand. Is this too much technicality for the audience, or how
No. You brought it in a very layman's language. I think you put it in APPLE Apple format. This is something which I liked actually, because you really, that the insight what you brought and the perspective what you brought is amazing. I'm sure our friends would be very happy and they'll be bubbling with a lot of questions. Prithvi, can you moderate the session, please? Prithvi?
Yes, I'll just. I'm going ahead, sir, with the questions.
Yeah, please.
From the chat box, I'm just reading out.
Sure.
Data security is a big concern. What kind of legal protection is available for users?
Yeah, no, I think, like I said, the whole aspect of data is bound by regulation based on different countries. So there are concerns around data, how much data you need to hold, how much data you can actually collect from individuals, and how long you have to store the data. And in fact, people are even going towards defining a right to be forgotten, for example. Today, the whole data world is very sticky, right? Once they catch hold of you, you can never be forgotten, right? You will keep getting reminders. Facebook knows who you are. You'll get notifications. But I think people are even going to the extent of defining rights around, hey, I want to be like forgotten, right? I don't want you as an entity to know who I am going forward. So I think all this is coming up. It's a very interesting point for even not just for companies, but also for people who are defining legislation, right? Very interesting space, but very tricky space as well, right? And sometimes the area is also gray, right? For example, if I go to Facebook and ask them, what all do you know about me? Facebook should be able to respond and say, here is the entire stuff that I know about you. That will probably run into thousands of pages. But those are the rights that are being defined. Those are the rights that are being questioned. And I think that's how legislation also will evolve, right? Today, for example, not every country has a wonderful data privacy legislation, right? But these are things that are actually catching up as we speak. Prithvi, will you read out the next questions? Should I look them up here?
Yeah. Post-COVID, how IT industry has changed, and what is the advice for IT person to enhance their skills?
Yeah. So I think one is, of course, COVID, like I said earlier, COVID removed the physical boundary, right? So today people are sitting wherever they are. And I'm aware of people who are sitting on a farm, somebody is in a homestay somewhere, but all that matters is, how much they're contributing. So COVID took away the physical boundary. COVID also brought into focus a lot of these technologies. I don't know how many people knew about Zoom earlier, but today probably everybody knows about Zoom, right? Everybody's on some Zoom call or the other. And it doesn't just stop there, right? There are so many interesting collaborative technologies. People can do whiteboarding, almost simulating your digital life, physical life in a digital world, right? So people can actually do white space, sharing, collaboration. So all the technologies have caught up significantly in the post-COVID kind of a world. There's also been a big focus on personal productivity, and I think you have to trust employees more than ever before. See, ultimately, you can't micromanage, right? In a physical world, you knew exactly who was coming in at what time and what were they doing, all of that. But in the virtual world, I think the trust element only has to go up. So companies have had a bit of a concern in the early days, but now I think people have, for the most part, realized that okay, employees are trustworthy. I think they step up and do what they have to do. Of course, it means that they need flexibility during their day job, and of course that's what they need. But people have realized that productivity has not taken a backseat or anything. There has also been cases of people looking for themselves, right? The whole work-life balance, etc. It's not easy to stay glued onto a computer for 12-15 hours. So I think many things have changed.
Gururaj,
some
can I
things have-
ask you a question?
Yes, please go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Gururaj, in fact, I must appreciate you. You have really condensed the whole thing in 1 hour. Massive job done. Now, my concern about the 5G, when you talked about tomorrow's environment is going to be highly intense with radiation. And what are these precautions you are probably putting across for preventing health hazards happening? Because the radiation 5G, it is spread over lower frequencies to the higher frequencies. I know that, but higher frequency it will affect the health conditions of the individual if the radiation is more than a particular value. So what are you proposing to do to safeguard against that?
Yeah. Again, Hari sir, thank you. Good question. I don't know if I'm fully qualified to answer that question, right? Because the IT folks typically are consumers of this technology, right? In that sense, you build on top of the telecom infrastructure. But again, if I just whatever little I know of the industry, radiations of course are going up, and the risk is there. Again, whether materially proven or not is a different question. But same with the number of devices, right? So the sheer number of devices around us. Is there a realistic way to judge the radiation? Of course, every phone has a SAR value and stuff like that. But I think it is a concern, and the again to an extent bound by legislation, to an extent controlled by the providers of telecom networks, etc. But I think beyond a point, there the hazard and the risk is there. But I'm assuming it will be managed. At least the necessary powers that we will look at what is an acceptable risk, right? I think I will not say it is risk free, but probably the thought will be towards how to manage that risk. But I'm not saying the IT industry is a driving force to manage that risk or whatever. I think it is beyond that.
Yeah. So for us, we appreciate that there is an element of risk.
There is. I think there
that is
will
good.
be.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
The next question in the chat box is regarding adoption of cloud services. Is there any changes noted in the customer service support satisfaction level, since customers need to rely on service providers for support and analysis post adoption of cloud? Is it a question?
I probably missed it, sir. Can you please say that again? I missed the flow of the question.
Yeah. Regarding the adoption of cloud services, is there any change noted in the customer service support and satisfaction level, since customers need to rely on service providers for support and analysis post adoption of cloud?
Okay, understood. So I think there are two parts to this, right? So every enterprise will have to make a decision on its own on what moves to the cloud, right? What kind of data moves to the cloud. There are some enterprises which are very risk averse. There are some enterprises which are okay to take a risk, right? So there is a trade-off between total cost of ownership, the level of service you get, and the risk you take, right? But again, like I said, a lot of evolution has happened in the whole cloud space. Earlier, people would be very hesitant to move customer data, PII as we call it, right? Personally identifiable data to the cloud. But as long as there is encryption that has come in, and the cloud providers are all, of course, bound by contracts around data breach, security, etc., people have slowly started to move even sensitive data to the cloud. As far as customer service is concerned, I think whether data sits on a cloud or not actually honestly doesn't matter. If anything, probably the cloud gives an edge to companies, because you are able to fully use the power of AI, ML, whatever, build some very interesting use cases using your data on the cloud. So the cloud gives you a backbone to be able to do that. But if the question is it only cloud that can help do that? No, you can as well do that same thing on premise. You can build all those similar infrastructure for AI, ML using your own on-premise type of infrastructure. But I think the cloud is actually enabling people to do a lot more, right? This is what I mean by cloud native services. If you're an insurance company, the cloud will actually give you ready-made capabilities to adjudicate claims. It can interpret your claim documents, or if you're a bank, the cloud has some services to actually look at your mortgage documents and analyze them digitally. So the cloud has moved way beyond just storage, network, and infrastructure into actually giving you some very useful services that you can use.
Yeah, thank you. The next question is, what is your take on cognitive science in IT?
So I think cognition has become mainstream, right? What we once thought humans can only do, today machines are able to do, right? And I think we have kind of crossed over into the point because of technologies like NLP or deep learning or whatever. Today we are solving some of the most difficult cognitive experiments, right? For example, the whole autonomous driving today is a great example of cognition. Right, and it's a very difficult form of cognition because there are so many things that have to come into play. What you see, what you sense, all of that stuff, right? So, but again, simple cognitive tasks are today taken for granted in a AI space. Again, whether everybody is using it or not is a different thing. But today, basic stuff around reading documents, pulling out values from documents, reading contracts, like I said. Looking at images and determining, say, a damage to a car or things like that. So I think a lot of this cognition is already taken for granted in today's world, and I think the level of cognition will only improve. Of course, accuracy of AI is still a debate. So people are accepting AI only when there is accuracy of 95, 97 kind of %. So some cognitive tasks have a very high degree of accuracy, some are not. But I think technology is significantly catching up right now. So cognition is a given actually in some use cases right now.
The next question is on .NET. .NET is a popular web developing tool used for long years now. How many years do you think this will be continue to be in use? Is there any other tool picking up to replace .NET?
Yeah, I think, like I said, there are a huge number of options to replace .NET. .NET is still used, by the way, I think in some computing environments. I would not say it is dead or anything. But today, I think companies are using a plethora of technologies, right? They are not confined to one. So somebody may use Python, JavaScript. Somebody may use other kind of libraries. Somebody may still use C++ for some server-side scripting. Somebody may use a mix of libraries to do some AI ML. So I think today's programming world is not just one, right? It's not just about do I use .NET, but I use a bundle of things. It is all about, I would say, I will use the term assembly for today's world, right? To have, am I good as a software engineer? Am I aware of the various things I can consume and stitch them together in a very short time frame? So today's world is really about that. It is not about reinventing the wheel. It is about knowing the things that is out there, bringing it and stitching it together in the shortest time possible. I think, yeah, so that's the answer to .NET. I don't think it is just about one thing replacing .NET, but I think it's about using the best that's out there from the community.
There's one more question. Even non-technical persons are required to use such skills and techniques. So how do you suggest to make it easy for non-techies? Yeah,
if you remember, I spoke of the whole low-code, no-code environments, right? And I'm aware of many companies, people who may not have learned a language, people who may not have learned, say, a JavaScript or a Python or whatever, but they still know enough to be able to kind of create a programming workflow visually, right? So this is where the whole aspect of low code, no code fits in. People are able to today simulate those kind of programs just by dragging, dropping, and creating a kind of a workflow. As long as you have a good awareness of logic and analytical skills, you don't need to be a programmer. I think that's where the whole world is heading. Absolutely.
The next question is, in this world of servers used across the countries, how do the IT professionals manage the global data privacy law, GDPR?
So I think, as I said, today's world is getting complex in the sense of awareness of if you're working for a European client, you need to know about the laws of the land, right? And similarly, if you're working for the US, you need to be aware of what it means to protect data. What does it mean to have a breach? And similarly for Australia, there is something called APRA and whatever. Right? So it is getting very complicated. and which is companies like us manage by having experts in the space who can coach us, guide us, because not every programmer is expected to be aware of, say, a law in Australia or in Europe. It's, of course, the person has to be aware of his own technologies, but there is also an awareness that somebody has to bring in around data privacy, or just managing the whole licensing aspect of things. So these are skills which are emerging. In the past, we didn't need these skills, but today we need an expert who is good in data understanding. We need a data privacy guy. We need somebody who can analyze contracts for different regions. We need somebody who is an expert in these things, right? So that's how the whole world is evolving.
The next question is, now the entire world is online and work from home. Any public-private partnership to improve the internet bandwidth in rural areas and also at a very economical price for higher data usage?
I think I'm aware of so many people actually trying to do this, even with the likes of the biggies like Google to the smallest of people. I think there's a whole lot of activity. In fact, Jio itself is a good example, right? How they kind of, in a very short time frame, they have been able to kind of tackle the whole, the countryside in terms of getting people online. It will only improve. I think there are many experiments going on. It is a wide space. It's a big opportunity for companies to solve the last mile. Jio is going at it. Google is going at it. Many third parties, small plus big combinations. I'm aware of a lot of activities. There is no one right answer. I think that's a big wide space.
Thank you. So this will be the last question. Huh? What will be the life in the next 10 years, Gururaj sir, with all this technology advancement? Yeah,
I think good question. This is a favorite topic of mine, right? Because the future world, if you remember, again, I'm about 27 years in the industry, and I remember in the late 80s or the early 90s, there used to be a whole bunch of concerns around computerization, right? I remember seeing people painting on the footpaths and all that, saying ban computers, and people felt there would be loss of jobs, right? But look at what has happened, right? Have we as a human race benefited from a whole aspect of computing, technology, and software? I think it has, right? So the role of software is only to amplify human capability, right? It is not to replace humans, but essentially it's a human plus machine, or people call it human plus plus in the industry, right? So it is getting humans to be better, not replacing humans. So I think not just the next 10 years, but even if you think, say, 20, 30 years, technology will remain pervasive. I keep telling my children, tech is a great space to play in. It's almost like evergreen, because I don't see technology going away, or something may die and something else will come up, because the rate of change is humongous. Yesterday's technology may not be relevant today. So as long as one is capable of being a lifelong learner, being an evergreen learner, I think you can thrive. So the future is all about human plus plus. It's all about human plus machines. It is all about getting machines to do the drudgery, the routine tasks, but humans keeping the ability to visualize the future, being able to be creative, and being able to learn and make the machines work for you. I think that's what the future is all about. Sorry, that's a generic answer, but I think it is very, very true.
Thank you, Mr. Gururaj Deshpande, for answering almost all the questions from the chat box, and it was really a very good 1 hour knowledge that you have shared to us, and a layman has really understood what is the technology, where it is going front. We really appreciate you, sir, and we also look for you for more such sessions to come. We'll definitely reach out to you, sir. We'll welcome you to our chamber for the presentation. And as a token of appreciation, sir, from the BCIC, we would like to give a virtual memento, and we'll ensure that it reaches to either to your office or to your residence. So we'll have the virtual memento, please. And after which we'll have our national anthem played to conclude the sessions.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the questions, and there's always, the learning is both ways. Yes. I always learn from the questions, from the interactions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Sir. So now let's have a national anthem played.
That was highlighted in the two Dharmiya projection, and that requirement is common across all. That we have, whether we have taken care of that or not.
जनगण अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Yeah, thank you all for joining for the session. Thank you, Mr. Gururaj Deshpande.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.